You're back on the Zero Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. And as always, it is a great pleasure to speak with my next guest, economist and economic historian, Richard Wolff, is the host of Economic Update, which is available as a podcast and also on Free Speech TV on Tuesday evenings. He is professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and is also a visiting professor at the New School in New York City. And he joins us now. So first of all, Richard Wolff, as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you, RJ. Glad to be here and glad to be talking with you again.
And before the program, I sent you my suggested topic for the day as the economics of comradeship, which I'm sure was not an especially enlightening characterization. So permit me to explain myself a little bit now, if I may. One of the things that has struck me about not only the profession of economics, but the way the sociology of the economics profession is interlinked with our culture as a whole is the emphasis, of course, on individualism. And to me, it seems that economics is, as people normally practice it or understand it, is the study of kind of an atomized population of individuals and how they're going to behave and which individual is going to go up or down or this way or that way based on forces and impulses and desires and ambitions. And so it seems to me to be the study of individuals reflecting a culture that emphasizes individuals over collective action and collective being and collective identity as a society. And that to me is, first of all, doesn't always predict the way history goes, right? Because sometimes people come together, sometimes unexpectedly in groups and do things that nobody saw coming. But it also, to me, reflects a value system. And you're free to tell me if I'm off base, but it reflects a value system to me that says that's how it should be. That you, Richard Wolff, I, Richard Eskow, should be interested in optimizing the creature comforts of my own life and that of the people in my household. And that comes before, yeah, sure, it's nice to be a good citizen. We should try to do that. But that ultimately, the way the world should work is I'm out for me, you're out for you. And if it's in our mutual interest not to kill each other, fine. But, me first. And first of all, does that, as a view of economics and its kind of social identity, does that make any sense to you?
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. That economics is grounded in a very particular way of understanding society. You're right about that. It is in no way universal. Once upon a time, when the profession was a little bit more integrated into what we call the social sciences, everyone who studied economics, say here in the United States, was required to take a course usually entitled The History of Economic Thought. And in that course, you would at least be introduced, even if it was brief, to a bit of an understanding that people have understood economics in radically different ways, that there's nothing universal, nothing perpetual, nothing natural about the way we do that now, any more than the way we dress now or sing now or consume food now is the way it always was. It wasn't. It has changed. But those courses have been let go. In many departments, they don't exist. They are the courses to which the lowest prestige for both the faculty and the student are attached. Therefore, they're easily overlooked, forgotten, missed, ignored. Bottom line, the profession now is very, very unself-conscious about its own particularity. And one of the things that makes it peculiar and particular is its individualism. I would even go so far as to say, I doubt there are as many commitments and as deep a set of commitments to individualism in most other disciplines when you compare it to economics, at least what we call mainstream economics. And so, for example, people like me, and I am in no way unique or I'm not in some tiny minority here, many of us as students would raise our hands in class when things were said to us that even we as Americans born and raised here knew were so excessive in terms of their individualism that we would raise our hands with some trepidation, given the way the professor was talking, and ask, well, what about this? And then that was a very key moment, because you could see in the face and in the eyes of the instructor that whatever his or her answer was, you were being told, don't go there. That place you're going with your question is an out of order place. You know, it's like discussing sex or something in a conversation where that really isn't appropriate, and everybody's eyebrows go up, not so much because it's about sex, but because it doesn't fit into the larger context. We were being trained to realize that to be successful as a young person wanting a career in economics, you had to expunge from your consciousness all of the little bits you had acquired in your education that made you realize that beginning with the individual, as if there really even is such a thing, is problematic.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. And it seems to me that, first of all, and I'm going to want to come back to this, but this whole idea of, this phrase that came to mind for me, the economics of comradeship, was inspired by a couple things. One was we've had Professor Jody Dean on the show. She wrote a very interesting book, perhaps you've seen, called Comrade. And it's an exploration of the word comrade basically in the history of communist movements. But comradeship is, as you point out, in terms of whether we really exist as individuals at all, comradeship is an essential part of the human experience. Without that connectedness to others, we're not fully human. And so first of all, that didn't seem to me to be reflected in the way we look at economics. But the second inspiration for it was in our last conversation, yours and mine. At the end, we started to get into, for example, talking about if we gave up cars and dedicated ourselves to mass transit. You started talking about different ways that might work. Maybe something can stop on the corner every couple minutes, what have you. And I started thinking more afterwards about, my own initial reaction as a, once again, car driving American since I moved out of the city was first of all, I don't want to have to do that to go to the grocery store. It's going to add 10 minutes to the trip to the corners. But as I thought about it more, I thought, well, okay, I was behaving like the stereotypical economic actor in your profession. But then it occurred to me, well, what if I knew that by doing that, I was part of a bigger project to save, forgive my language, the goddamn planet? At that point, I might actually be jubilant to know that I could walk to this corner, take a minibus, and add a few minutes to my trip and save it would give me meaning and purpose and depth that I don't currently have in my life, certainly when I go to the grocery store. So, and that got me to thinking about it, what an economics of comradeship would look like. What would it be like if people in your profession routinely looked at collective as well as individual motivations and actions? And do you get what I'm driving at all? Does it make any sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I'm afraid, but my answer is my profession, with very, very few exceptions, wouldn't even know how to ask the kind of question your comments point to, let alone offer an answer. I mean, let's be clear. The basic mainstream analysis that we work with in mainstream economics begins with a fully formed individual who has a preference system. We believe that. That's what we teach our students, that in the mind of each individual are rankings. I like bananas more than I like peaches. I like fruit more than I like vegetables. I like chicken more than I like beef, and on across the entire universe of potential commodities. And that when I go into the market with whatever money I have, I pick and purchase what it is I want and desire. And this is the way the story is connected. Now, if you've even had, I'm not saying one semester of psychology, I'm talking about 1 week of casually reading Psychology Today magazine, you would know that the simple problem, what is it I want, is the subject of hundreds of years of debate and research because it's an extremely complicated question. There are millions of people speaking to therapists right now who ask the question, I don't know what I want. Can you help me figure it out? I'm having trouble with my relationships. I'm having trouble with my job. I'm having trouble with my own sense of self because I'm not clear on what I want. I seem to want and not want the same thing at the same time. Am I crazy? And so forth and so on. The economists care nothing about any of that. For them, everything is crystal clear. I mean, I am personally connected to psychologists, and when I explain to them the psychological presumptions of economics, they have one of two reactions. One, they start laughing hysterically because it is so funny that we, as a profession, we economists, should be so utterly out of date. But the other one, the alternative reaction, is closer to horror, because there is a sense that this is a system that, because it presumes that, makes all of its decisions, its adjustments, its policy recommendations based on a completely out of order conception of human beings. Let me give you a couple of examples that may help make the point clear. There's an immense industry called advertising. Every object you buy in a store is advertised one way or another, either on a billboard or on a TV ad, or in the wrapping that it comes in, or in its location in the store where you purchase it. But positioning, manipulating, controlling, describing is an enormous effort to get you to behave in a certain way. All right? There's already then the recognition that your behavior is malleable. You actually don't know what you're going to buy when you go into a store, which is why it's worth companies who want you to buy their product to work on you right up to the minute you decide which box of cereal to pull off the shelf. And if they can make you think about snap, crackle, and pop, they may get more sales than if they don't. So they're working on you to shape who you are, what you want, how you imagine yourself every minute of the day. And you know, we live in the United States where advertising is more of a suffocating totality than probably in any other country on this earth, which makes it ironic that we act like it makes no difference, and yet we obviously, as a society, believe that it does. Then to your question about comradeship, I mean, that's crucial. Maybe if I didn't have an automobile and I had to take a van or a cab, or I'd be thrown together with other people in a completely
Right.
different way all the time as I went to the store, or I went to my job, or I visited my relatives, because I would be using mass transit. I would be interacting with people, meeting new people. You know, the United States is famous for being a country of very lonely people. Maybe if we explain the way economics teaches us we should, there's this concept in economics called opportunity cost, that the value of everything is measured by the alternative uses to which it could be put. In other words, the opportunity cost of the private automobile is enormous because of what we could have but don't, because we're spending all these resources on having a private car. You know, and the automobile is a wonderful example. The vast majority of automobiles sit unused most of the time. They sit in your garage, they sit in your driveway, they sit in a parking lot, they sit. It's easy to show that if we shared automobiles, if we made sure that the person who needed it got it, but didn't sit on it in the garage for most of the hours of the day, we could transport people just as well as we do now at a tiny fraction of the cost in terms of automobiles, pollution, fossil fuel use, and everything else. But nobody presents to the American people the opportunity cost. Suppose we said to everybody, if we go from a private automobile system to a mass transit system, it will free up X billions of dollars, and that will make the cost of higher education in the United States free. Anybody wants to go to college, you go. No tuition, no fees. By the way, that just replicates what 8 or 9 countries in Europe already do. But we could do it, and we could pay for it by this. Nobody has this in their mind, no opportunity to make a vote. It is kept out of the consciousness in part by an economic system and an economics profession that excludes all such from its purview.
And it seems to me that when this happens, and I hope you're still with us, Richard Wolff, we were having a little connectivity problem. It seems to me that when this happens, are you back with us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. It seems to me when this happens that we also fail to study. Economics also, as a profession, also fails to study adequately. I mean, there have been studies, but what is the collective cost to the environment, to the planet, to inequality, to of having all these automobiles running all the time? Sure, it's essentially it's quantified, but it's not factored into studies of individual or group behavior. So it seems to me that, in a sense, and forgive me for saying this, but it feels that the failure to study these things reflects something almost pathological about the economics profession, that the focus on individuals to the exclusion of collective well-being, and the focus on the moment as largely to the exclusion of long-term effects and impacts, feels a little pathological. It feels that if you did that in any other aspect of life, you would be considered antisocial. Does that seem unfair? And I'm just wondering if the economics profession doesn't need a little therapy here.
I'm afraid it needs a great deal of therapy because there's also a kind of self selection going on. Let me tell you a story about my own education. Um, I took economics courses in college because I had gotten the idea from my parents, from my high school, that economy was very important, that what happened in the world, all the great migrations, the wars, the depressions, the big events that I had learned about were in good part driven by economic considerations, economic forces, economic interests. And I wanted to learn about those in the same way that I took a course in political science because I had understood what the government did was consequential, or I studied history because I had been persuaded that learning what happened in the past was a major way to make sense of what's happening in the future and in the present and so on. And then a traumatic experience. I took the course in economics, the introductory course that my college urged us as freshmen or sophomores to take. And the course immediately begins with equations, mathematical equations written on the board, a clipped short commentary by the teacher on the equation. And over the next weeks, it becomes clear to me that all of the interesting social, historical, exciting things that brought me to the class were totally out of the picture in terms of what this man, it was overwhelmingly men at that time, very few women in the class, and no women teacher. By the way, I'm talking about Harvard College, which is where I went to school. So I'm not, if it's this way at Harvard, you can imagine what it was everywhere else. And my teacher made me understand that the economy was a fixed thing, that it worked like a machine, and that we were being taught how the machine works
Right.
so that we could adjust it, appreciate how wonderful it was, and become adept at seeing how it would function in the period ahead, something like that. I wasn't interested in that. This was I had come from the physical sciences, so the mathematics wasn't the problem. And I was always interested in physics and chemistry and all of that. But that's not why I took this course. I wanted to get all the interesting stuff. And I was being told that economics was really a branch of engineering. But instead of a motor in a vehicle, you were looking at the economy as the engine of our society. And it only got worse. And here's what happened. I stuck it out. So I finished the semester. I got my grade. I took my exam, but I left. Any chance that I might have majored in economics was gone. I majored in history precisely because in history, you can look at everything that happened and you can see how the different parts interact. I wasn't going to do the narrow economics. And other people dropped out. Many of my friends didn't even finish that course, let alone major in economics. And you know who was left? About half were mathematical people, and the other half were engineering type students. And they decided this was fun because they could solve these equations. They understood what a system of equations was and what it all meant in the larger scheme of things. They didn't think that was relevant. The teachers didn't think it was relevant. Nobody taught it to us. And so by the time these people graduated and went on to graduate school, you had cemented the narrowness into the core of the profession. And as these people got their PhDs, and I'm unusual, I went back. I went to major in economics as a graduate student, even though I hadn't as an undergraduate, which already made me unique. There weren't very many like us, some, but not many. And I worked very hard to learn the economics, which I had to do, and I did. I went to Stanford after I left Harvard, and I finished my education at Yale. So I'm a poster boy for what's supposed to be the best there is of this stuff. But I was unique because I always kept my bigger interest in the larger society and history, and I was not won over to becoming the narrow technocrat, which is really what the economics profession creates and what it teaches. And then it's self-reproducing over time. That's why it is, in a sense, pathological. It constantly rewards the people who do the narrow engineering stuff. It's famous. If you pick up virtually any one of the top half dozen journals, the American Economic Review, any of them, you will be able quickly to understand that you can't understand any of it. You cannot read the articles. They are way too mathematically intricate. They presume a familiarity with the underlying arithmetic, which the vast majority of Americans cannot do because nobody ever taught them. By the way, it isn't that it's difficult. That's a fake. That's just the insecurity of the profession to think what they do is sophisticated. Any mathematician will tell you it's childish in the realm of mathematics. But among social scientists and humanists, it's a lot of arithmetic and it excludes them. And they're all supposed to pray to this odd god of mathematics or scientificity, but it's all a fake. The economics profession periodically has mavericks who figure this out and who castigate the profession. There were dozens of them who said, you didn't see the 2008-9 crash coming. You had no idea that it was coming. You had no idea what to do when it hit, and you haven't understood it since, and you didn't prepare us for the crash in 2020. In other words, there are people who see that it is completely incapable of doing most of the things that a real serious discipline would want to do. It cannot interact with people in other fields because they have developed so specialized a language that no communication is really possible. And it means that the few people in economics who have a broader interest tend sooner or later to fall away from the profession, to go and work in another department or with other colleagues in other disciplines, and to hope that the commitment to quote unquote interdisciplinary studies provides them with a framework in which they can do a little of what they do. And then there are some of us like me who become critics of the profession. I mean, you know that I advocate for worker co-ops. Well, in 99% of the business schools in the United States, there is no course on any organization of business other than a capitalist one, in which a tiny group of people, the owner, the board of directors, whatever they are, make all the decisions, what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, what to do with the profits, and tell a vast majority of people, employees, what to do. I mean, that's a particular way of organizing. That's capitalism. Okay. It's also like slavery with masters and slaves. And it's also like feudalism with lords and serfs. But even that comparison never happens in a bit. You are taught that business is the capitalist form of business. But you know, this is bizarre. This would be the equivalent of my offering a course, and I would call it religion. And as you, the students, sat there the first day, I began to talk in great detail about Baha'i. Baha'i is a religion. But as the course went on, a smart student and maybe a not so smart student would eventually raise his or her hand and say something wise, such as the following: Look, professor, I really am interested in learning about the Baha'i religion. But this wasn't a course in the catalog on the Baha'i religion. It was a course on religion, and you're teaching the course religion as if this one particular religion were somehow the only one, the chief one, the one worth studying. And frankly, that's ridiculous. That makes no sense at all. That's my position. We learn capitalist economics. There is nothing else. Even in the old days, and those are gone, when they used to be before the Soviet Union collapsed, there used to be a course called Comparative Economic Systems. Okay? That one course. In a curriculum of 50 courses, there'd be one course on comparing systems. You'd hear a professor spend 2 weeks dismissing the inefficient other courses and showing you how capitalism dominates them all. This is childish. This is really what can only be ascribed as Cold War academics, driven by fear that if you're an economist and you're interested in alternatives to capitalism, well, then you're really close to being a Soviet agent or some other fantasy. Nobody wants to destroy their career with that. And so that's why it seems to you, coming at this with non-disciplinary eyes, as pathological, because it is. It's driven by a pathological fear. Even though the Cold War is over, the people trained and chosen in and by the Cold War are still not yet retiring in enough numbers so they can control whom they hire in each department to replace them, which they are doing. And so you have only the students, only from the students can there be the revolt that will force all this to change. When the students say to the professors, look, you're wasting our time. The system you're teaching us is dying. And we want to get someone in here who can teach us about the alternatives that aren't dying. And the professor will have a hissy fit and he'll be all upset and then he'll go because there's no place left for him. He's talking to nobody. We're not there yet, but it is coming.
I will say there is one way in which the economics profession differs from engineering, which is if I were a civil engineer and I built a dam that immediately collapsed and caused an enormous flood, I'm pretty sure it would be a career ender. But if I were an economist who endorsed financial deregulation in the 1990s, leading to the 2008 crisis, costing what, 66 trillion in global wealth, I'm fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unfortunately, if you ever want to, RJ, I can introduce you because I went to these fancy schools. I know a lot of these people personally. I'll be glad to introduce you to people who will tell you that one of the reasons they make the kinds of glib predictions they do is that there is no consequence. As long as they mouth the formula of the profession, they're safe. Their predictions can be completely nutty. Makes no difference.
And one of the people you're probably thinking of said famously after the crash, nobody I knew saw this coming. Now, the rational person would say, well, maybe you ought to meet new people.
You need to go out more. That's right.
Right. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, Richard Wolff. But I hope next time we can take this to the next level, perhaps talking about how Marxist thinking and other forms of thought have allowed us to explore, at least open the topics of human fulfillment and behavior in a broader sense than this mechanical atomized version. But we'll have to save that for our next time. So as always, Richard Wolff, economist and host of Economic Update, a great pleasure speaking with you, and thanks for coming on the program.
My pleasure too. And I would love to continue this conversation because it's an important one in terms of how this profession influences what goes on in this society.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, and have a great Labor Day.
You
And
too.
to those of you at home, we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.